Hi, Simon here again. In this video, I just want to walk you through my guide to environmental sustainability. It's a high-level walkthrough, give you an idea of what sort of content's in there. This is something I've put together very slowly over a period of time, and it's not done. I mean, this is sort of like repainting harbour bridges. You start at one end, you get to the other, and it's time to start at the other end again. So always need to try and keep us up to date with you know, new information, new innovations that come out, and still filling in. There's still quite a few gaps, as you'll see when I walk through it. But anyway, I want to just tell you what's in here, what I've got so far. So, let's start with the big picture. I mean, this is this is a tool called Prezi, Prezi, which is a presentation tool. Sort of think of it like on PowerPoint, but more dynamic. You can sort of zoom in and out, go backwards. It's quite cool. Anyway, so the big picture talks about what's the current state of the world, and it's fairly brief because I don't think anyone who's got this far and is interested in this needs talking too much about what the current state of the world is. But anyway, where are we and what's the problem in words? And it's deliberately in orange and red because it's a problem. So anyway, I talk about the problem, and here's sorry. This is a typical sort of slide for me. I give some commentary and then I put some links in here as to where I've got this information from. And some of these are, you can already see, 2017, 2022, maybe getting a bit out of date, but the whole idea is to keep renewing and refreshing this as we go through. But this sort of stuff about where the problem we're facing is fairly well known. So we talk about the problem, the current state of the world. I also talk about the future state of the world. What does sustainable development mean? What is net zero? That's part of the solution, but not everything. We need net zero, but necessary but not sufficient. We also need to clean up the mess we've made. We need to really get to a circular economy and systems thinking. So that's just a very high level view of the future state, the current state, the future state, and then being a project manager, I always think about the transition. I mean, how do you get from current state to future state? I won't drill into there, mostly because I'm still working on that section, but there's a lot of work obviously needed to. How we do the transition is probably it's the biggest conversation we have. Most people in the field have a fairly good agreement, I think, as to where we want to get to, roughly. I mean, everyone talks about net zero now. I mean, as opposed to a couple of years ago when I was starting this, those sort of phrases weren't in common parlance, but they are now. And I think the arguments are more about how we get there. So the transition is intended to be my take on how we get there. So we have those sort of topics. Then over on the right-hand side here, what I think of as the meat and potatoes section. Sort of this is the big areas where emissions happen or environmental impacts happen and what we need to do to try and mitigate those. So energy, for example, I talk about the grid because you need to produce energy, you need to move it around, and you need to store it. So the grid is around moving energy around, specifically electrical energy. Storage, mostly again about electrical energy, and then topics around how we are going to produce that energy. So, for example, wind, I talk about offshore wind, innovation in the wind, end of life for wind, because there's quite a lot of attention now, good attention being put around end of life. What happens when you get all those turbine blades at the end of their life? Again, more and more innovation happening, reuse, very circular, lovely circular use here in this particular, like that particular approach, but that's obviously not suitable for mass adoption. So anyway, that's the typical of a type of slide I have in this presentation, I think. Talk about wind, talk about solar energy, quite a lot of depth actually. Talk about fusion, one of my little hobby horses actually. I'm a big fan of the potential of fusion, and there's a lot happening there. But it's a moonshot. If it comes through, fantastic. But don't hold your breath. Hydrogen, niche application is my view, but not going to go into that too much detail now. So energy, trying to cover the ground there. Transport and industry, this is where all the real heavy lifting is what I've called it. And again, light duty transportation, heavy duty transportation, sea, air, and policy is an area. And then industry, which I've divided up myself into buildings, concrete, metals, particularly steel, plastics, and other industry. And that's, again, where a lot of the challenges are, but a lot of opportunities. But these are the areas where, if we're going to move to a circular economy, these are the topics that need to be tackled. And why are these important? The graphic here tells us we can do all of the behavioural changes we want, but according to the IEA, the little bits in purple here are the impacts it's going to have by doing behavioural changes. The vast majority of impact is by changing the processes by which we make and move things around the planet. That's where the gains are going to be. And again, most of that is stripping fossil fuels out of those processes and feeds, commodity feeds. Then I've got biosphere, talking about land use, water use, biodiversity, and particularly on cleanup. What do we need to do to clean things up, to clean up the ocean, get the methane out of the environment? The other gases, the other very, very potent gases, fluorine-based mostly, fluorine gases, ecosystem restoration, carbon capture, getting a lot of attention now, just a lot of, well, should we say publicity now, but very, very, very far away from practicality. And geoengineering, again, something that gets a lot of people very upset, but something which, personally, I think we'd rather have it on the back pocket than not. Let's see what happens there in the next 20 years. So, sort of some of the big sections. There will be a section specifically focused on New Zealand because, hey, that's where I live and play. But there's not much in there at the moment, so I won't go in there. And then my other section here, Be Smarter. This is sort of like the cross-cutting piece, where it's about these sort of topics: energy efficiency, and I think the big pledge that's trying to be pushed through at the COP28 is saying we need to double our rate of energy efficiency and triple the renewable energy generation by 2030. Yes, fantastic. But all the attention's on the renewable energy. Energy efficiency always flies under the radar. Politicians can't cut ribbons on energy efficiency. And so it's always the first thing that's sacrificed. If you look at the idiotic things that the UK government's done recently, the first things they did was get rid of subsidies for heat pumps because they're more efficient. They're vastly more efficient than gas boilers. But what they thought anyway, they could just get away with cutting that out. A typical example of how energy efficiency is always regarded as a low priority, even though usually it has the biggest bang for buck. Anyway, circular economy. I've put quite a, I think, decent section here about sort of a primer to the circular economy. I think one of the things we are not doing well, we're talking well about getting phrases like net zero into the public domain, and that's great, but what we really need to be talking about is the circular economy and zero waste and sustainability. Net zero is not sufficient. That's not enough. That gets you to a point, but that's not actually the answer. The circular economy is, in my view, that's the key thing. If we do that, if we manage to move to a fully circular economy with a regenerating nature, all those good things, that will take care of the other problems. So I think those are the philosophies we should be following to drive the philosophies and principles, use those to drive our actions, and that guides how we do the transition. So in here, I've put some of my learnings around my grouping and description of the circular economy, and rethink, reuse, remanufacture, all those good things, systems thinking, business models, what does it look like, and how do we measure it? That's quite a interesting topic for me. How do you actually measure the degree of circularity? And there are people out there working on that, and some commercial approaches to it. I think it's very interesting stuff. Personally, resource recovery. Originally, I called this waste management, but in line with the zero waste philosophy, we shouldn't regard things as waste. They're just resources that are in the wrong place. So, resource recovery, and that little symbol there means that's something I'm still working on. Similarly, the innovation section there, innovation in the context of a circular economy. So, again, another section in the presentation. And I think that I've covered everything. at a very high level. But hey, that was the point of this, just to sort of skim over. I do intend to sort of produce more videos drilling into various topics. I mean, that's sort of the point of the whole presentation, is a talking point, as a starting point. If there's something you've seen where you really want me to drill in further, please leave a comment and I will attempt to respond. But otherwise, until then, thank you for listening. Bye.